Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for what is a very visual presentation. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Terrific, great, okay, all right. All right. And you can see my slides, I assume? I'll assume that's a yes.
Yeah, we hear and see you
Okay, great.
perfectly.
All right. All right. Good morning, everybody, from a rather rainy Ithaca. I'm sorry I can't be with you there. My thanks to the organizers of this conference and also to my colleague, Jeff Chusage, for spurring this collaboration. We're really excited to be working with all of you. I'm here to provide a case study for you today drawn from our work of Caucasus Heritage Watch, and I should make it clear up front that this work is truly collaborative work between our Cornell group, which consists of me, Professor Lori Katchadourian, and Husi Kulian, and our research assistant, and Ian Lindsay at Purdue University. The work we do is in a disciplinary space, an emerging disciplinary space that we call heritage forensics. It's at the intersection of archaeology, which is where most of our training lies, at cultural aerospace, politics, and law. And it's an effort to examine and develop the techniques for understanding the impacts on cultural heritage of conflict by attending to cultural sites both before, during, and after hostilities. The setting for our work is the enduring conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh area between the two. Between 1923 and 1991, Nagorno-Karabakh sat as an autonomous oblast within the Azerbaijan SSR. As many of you will know, that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the area became the site of intense hostilities, breaking away from Azerbaijan in a period of dramatic conflict. A unsettled ceasefire in 1994 resulted in the de facto jurisdiction of the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic over the territory of the oblast and the surrounding, what were called 7 territories that had been seized. In 2020, Azerbaijan launched a military campaign to regain the territories that resulted initially in the transfer of those territories beyond Nagorno-Karabakh back to Azerbaijan. And with a brief set of hostilities again in September 23, resulted in the exile of the entire Armenian population from Nagorno-Karabakh and the transfer of the entire territory to the domain of Azerbaijani control. Caucasus Heritage Watch was initiated in the wake of the 2020 conflict out of a deep concern that for Armenian cultural heritage sites that fell under Azerbaijani sovereignty. And we developed a twofold project for investigating not only what is happening to cultural heritage sites, but also how cultural heritage came to be on the front lines of conflict in the first place. And this project had 2 primary components. The first were historical investigations into effectively what happens to cultural conflict when it emerges as the site of political contestation. We conducted 2 historical investigations focused on the period between 1994 and 2020 to understand the differential experience of heritage sites under first Azerbaijani sovereignty and also the control of the Armenian government of the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. And then the second aspect of our work is on contemporary investigations. That is, what is the fate of cultural monuments that are at risk right now, and how can we utilize advanced satellite imagery techniques to provide an opportunity to deter and safeguard and document cultural heritage violations. Let me start with the historical investigations. Our first was focused on the question of what happens to Armenian cultural heritage under Azerbaijani sovereign jurisdiction. And to investigate this, we turned away from Nagorno-Karabakh proper to the province of Nakhchivan, an exclave of Azerbaijan located southwest of the Armenia Sunni district. And we began this investigation in large measure because there had been very credible reports of destruction to a particular cemetery in southeastern Nakhchivan, the cemetery of Oljugha or Julfa. This was a medieval Armenian cemetery consisting of thousands of stone-carved khachkars, which are cross stones. And there were reports that had emerged in the late 1990s and early 2000s that the cemetery was being systematically destroyed. Video evidence emerged in the early 2000s of Azerbaijani soldiers hacking apart the khachkar stones and dumping them in the Araxes River. And satellite imagery investigation conducted initially by the American Academy for the Advancement of Science and then followed up by our own investigations did seem to demonstrate that this was in fact the case. We utilized hexagon imagery, American reconnaissance satellite imagery from 1970s and 80s to document the appearance of the Oljugha cemetery during the late Soviet period. As you can see here, the stippling effect on the hexagon imagery is clear attestation of the survival of many of these tombstones well through the Soviet period. But by early 2000s, this is a QuickBird image from 2003, there was clear evidence of extensive damage to the cemetery, including what we interpret to be a bulldozer scar going straight through the territory of the old khachkars. By 2009, the cemetery had effectively been entirely erased, confirming the eyewitness reports from the other side of the Arax River that attested to its complete erasure. Based on this finding from Oljugha, Caucasus Heritage Watch decided to undertake an entire systematic study of the corpus of Armenian cultural heritage sites across the territory of Nakhchivan. We were able to compile a compendium of 110 sites out of ethnographic and ethnohistorical materials, old declassified Soviet maps, and also hexagon imagery. Of the total corpus of sites, we were able to assess that 110 were locatable and 108 had been entirely destroyed. So let me show you what that evidence looks like. This is the Karmir Monastery of Ostapat, still extant in a 1973 hexagon satellite image in your left. We have a historic photo in the center. And by 2003, the site had been totally expunged of all material. This is the monastery of St. Tovma in the village of Ailis or Agulis. In a 1973 image, this monastery is still in very good shape. It had been visited by ethnohistorians as well during the late 1960s and 1970s and was found to be fully intact and in good condition. By 2009, the site has been completely expunged of the Armenian historical remains. And by 2021, a new mosque had been built on the former site. This is the Mashtots Monastery of Mesropovan, and this is a particularly compelling site because it attests not only to the presence and now destruction of the monastery, but also the emphatic completeness of the erasure. In most all of the sites where we documented the complete eradication of Armenian heritage sites, it was not simply a matter of knocking down a building or turning buildings into ruins. The sites were themselves fundamentally scrubbed of all evidence of prior occupation. They were not all built upon subsequently as Tovma was. Many were left empty and remain empty to this day. But they were all fully scrubbed, leaving no building material that we could detect on site. Another aspect of the campaign to eradicate Armenian cultural heritage was its capacity to project the force of destruction into extraordinarily remote environs, and also to attack structures that were very likely not visibly associated with Armenian cultural practices from their material forms, but would have been known only in bureaucratic heritage lists to have been part of the Armenian legacy. This is the Church of Michin Ankuzik in the village of Anzur. You can see here that the church was itself already a ruin at the time of this image in 1973. The village itself is also a ruin. Only a few assorted structures that were likely collective farms that were visible here in the lower right of the image remain of this particular village. It's high up in the mountains. And yet, by 2009, the site had been scrubbed clean like all of the other sites that we were able to analyze. The projection of this force well up into the mountains, into areas of quite obscure locations, suggests that it could only have been organized by state apparatuses. In sum, as I mentioned, 108 of 110 Armenian cultural sites have been completely eradicated, making this one of the most thorough cases of cultural erasure ever documented. It is certainly not the largest in terms of its quantitative numbers, but in terms of its percentage, it's one of the most systematic and extensive campaigns of cultural heritage we've been able to document. Now, the second historical investigation we undertook was to ask the inverted question, which is what happens to Azerbaijani cultural heritage when under the sovereign jurisdiction of Armenian forces. And then here we turn to the unrecognized government of Nagorno-Karabakh to understand how they approached the cultural heritage of the Azerbaijani communities that had been exiled from Nagorno-Karabakh as a result of the violence in the early 1990s. And here the picture was much more complicated than it was. If in Nakhchivan we documented just simply destruction, across Nagorno-Karabakh we documented a much more complicated picture. There was certainly damage and evidence of some destruction. There were also sites that seemed to have survived relatively intact. You can see here evidence of considerable damage at the bottom to the Mamar Mosque, and damage to the mosque in Giyazli near Akdam as well. But at the same time, we can also turn to cases like the Sardarli Mosque and the Chalibilar Mosque that had their roofs removed, their metal roofs that had been placed there during the Soviet period, but that the structures themselves remained largely intact. This is a good example of that phenomenon I'm talking about. This is the large Agdam Mosque in Agdam. And although the city itself was largely devastated during the conflict, the mosque survived largely intact, including both of its minarets. Only the roof, the metal roof, had been removed. This said, while there was evidence of what we call heritage mining, the extraction of fungible resources from heritage sites, along with other sites across the urban landscapes, there were also episodes of targeted destruction, such as the Haji Al-Akbar Mosque in Fuzuli, which seems to have been destroyed late in the 2010s. Overall, you can see from these pie charts that the landscape of cultural heritage was much more complicated in the areas of the unrecognized Nagorno-Karabakh Republic than it had been in Nakhchivan. We see evidence of cultural heritage destruction, yes, particularly in the area around Agdam and a little bit and some in Shusha as well. But we also see evidence for a very variable landscape of cultural impacts. Some damage, major and minor, but also a good deal of cultural heritage remains that remained largely unchanged. Neglected, to be sure, but not targeted in the kind of systematic program of cultural erasure that we documented in Nakhchivan. It's with these two historical studies as predicates that we turn to the investigations of the contemporary status of cultural heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh following the 2020 conflict with Azerbaijan that resulted in the transfer of the territory to Azerbaijani sovereignty. And here we again utilize the tools of satellite and remote sensing because the area remains largely unvisible by cultural heritage practitioners to provide on-the-ground attestation of the fate of Armenian cultural monuments at risk. Our satellite monitoring utilizes a database of approximately 520 sites that are being monitored at any one time. That include churches, monasteries from the medieval and early modern period, as well as historic cemeteries as part of our investigations. The heritage list of the sites that we monitored were put together by heritage practitioners amongst the descendant communities of Nagorno-Karabakh themselves. Most occasions, most of the materials we study and we keep an eye on are related to that tradition. But that being said, we are also monitoring Azerbaijani cultural heritage sites as well that we compiled as part of our historical investigations. The current state of cultural heritage under Azerbaijani control in Nagorno-Karabakh is certainly at risk. We have documented extensive damage to cultural sites utilizing techniques of heritage forensics. One of the first places we documented was the damage and destruction of the Metztacher Historic Cemetery. As you can see in the left-hand image, we have a 2020 GOI image of the cemetery. It's quite large. In spring of 2021, the cemetery was largely bulldozed as part of the construction of a road that was going through the village. And as you can see from the right-hand image from May of 2021, the entire cemetery seems to have been pushed into a spoil heap to provide a roadbed that would have mixed the gravestones, bones of the ancestors into one gigantic pile of heritage destruction for the roadbed. The final course of the road, I should note, barely impinged upon the territory of the cemetery, which suggested to us early on that in many cases the cultural heritage destruction we see going on may be developed as a kind of corollary benefit of wider scale local development, where the apparatuses of road construction and local redevelopment can be deployed also for the task of cultural erasure. It's not only cemeteries that have borne the brunt of demolition in the Karabakh region. This is the 19th century church of Serb Sarkis in the village of Mokhanis or Susanlik, which was destroyed in early 2022 as part of the eradication of the village. You can see here that the church has been completely annihilated as part of the destruction campaign there. It's not entirely clear what drove this particular episode of destruction, since it was not followed by a redevelopment program, but there may well be plans that we're not informed of. And it was not only in outlying villages. This is in the very large cultural center of Shusha or Shushi, one of the cultural gems of Karabakh. This is the 19th century church of St. Hovannes Mrkotich, or Ganachjam as it was known locally. This is an image on the left of ours from 2023 showing the church still extant. It had been damaged in the 2020 Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. One of its cupolas had been largely destroyed, but it was still intact, and there had been attestations in Azerbaijani media of plans to restore the church and turn it to the Russian Orthodox diocese. Those plans came to an abrupt halt in spring of 2024 when our monitoring found that the entire church had been eradicated, reduced to the same kind of demolished pile of rubble that we had often seen in the examinations of Nakhchivan. In total, our satellite monitoring results to date of the contemporary conditions of Armenian cultural heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh attest to the destruction of at least 14 sites. We're in the midst of a monitoring round currently and have detected 2 additional sites, so that number is now 16. And we've documented damage to 16 additional sites, and we have over 40 sites now on our list of threatened cultural objects. This suggests a very precarious state for Armenian cultural heritage in the region. We should note that Cultural Heritage Watch is a non-political organization. We take no position whatsoever on the political status of Nagorno-Karabakh or sovereign disposition of the territory. Our job is to monitor fragile and precious cultural resources that have no other opportunity to be protected. There's no descendant community that remains in Nagorno-Karabakh to speak for the remains of this medieval and early modern Armenian community. And I think looking ahead, we see the outlook to be quite fragile. Much, of course, depends upon the outcome of negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and we are eager to contribute as we can to processes of truth and reconciliation. The long-term trends, as you can see, the trend lines are going in the wrong direction. We would like to see that threat line, in particular the gray line on the bottom, trending downward as sites are removed from threatened status. We do have a mechanism in place for removing sites from that threatened status, and we hope to see that going down over time. But there has been considerable uptick in spring 2024 in particular, and I think in our current monitoring mission in terms of direct damage to cultural sites that we hope can be arrested. We maintain a number of techniques for making the results of Caucasus Heritage Watch visible to the public. We maintain an online dashboard on our website that allows for stakeholders to get a current sense of exactly the disposition of cultural sites, which ones have been impacted, which ones are threatened, and what is currently under monitoring. There is the capacity for filtering to some degree on the sites as well to get a clear sense of where the impacts are so that scholars and civil society organizations can have a clear sense of the impacts. We're also eager to bring the conclusions and assessments of Caucasus Heritage Watch to a wide array of potential stakeholders and communities. Our work has been part of the case Armenia v. Azerbaijan, currently ongoing in The Hague at the International Court of Justice, which resulted in a preliminary finding in 2021 that required Azerbaijan to take all necessary measures to prevent and punish acts of vandalism and desecration affecting Armenian cultural heritage, including but not limited to churches and other places of worship, monuments, landmarks, cemeteries, and artifacts, or in other words, the very material that Caucasus Heritage Watch monitors. We have documented extensive acts of destruction since the ICJ's preliminary finding, and so it remains to be seen how this dispute will be settled within the sphere of international law. We are also working to inform public policy members. We've testified on Capitol Hill in Washington. This is testimony to the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, part of the United States Congress, in order to make sure that bilateral relationships and negotiations constantly keep cultural heritage on the front lines of discussions and communication. We are certainly engaged with the United Nations, particularly with UNESCO as well, and we also are eager to keep media well informed of the precarious status of cultural heritage remains in the region. You can follow us on a range of social media. We are a remarkably antisocial social media organization in that we post only what we know. We don't follow, we don't like or engage, but we provide fact-based information into a community of discussion that oftentimes lacks for real facts. And that's what our organization is primarily attentive to. We also have a new book coming out this summer entitled Heritage Forensics that provides full details on the historical case studies and on some of the initial lessons learned in the cultural monitoring that we're doing currently. This should be out in early July, I believe, is the publication date. So with that, I'll stop my sharing and be happy to take any questions that you might have about heritage forensics or the condition of cultural heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Дуже дякуємо за цю доповідь.
Thank you very much for your report. We will be moving on. Now, all the questions.
Are you on English channel? Do you hear the translation? You
No,
should
I
switch
don't.
to the translation
How do I?
because we will have questions maybe in Ukrainian and also other presentations for you to understand everything.
I don't know how I do that. Let me see.
There should be
Interpretation.
a globe icon. You click it and it will be everything in English now for you.
Okay, let me see. Let's see if it works.
I will try to speak in Ukrainian. You show us if you understand.
Okay.
Дякуємо дуже за доповідь. Ми будемо переходити до...
Thank you very much for your report. So, thank you very much for your speech, and we will be going over to the next speaking, and all the questions will be in the end. It was a very exciting presentation about this territory because indeed it is beyond the attention for Ukrainians because we are very busy with our internal conflict and with the war on our land, and very often we overlook the similar situations around the world, even though we could advise from ourselves or we could listen to other people's experience. Now we will listen to Ivan Zotsenko speaking about the experience in Ukraine and about the specific case studies. We will be talking about the Kiev region territory, about Bilohorod, Katashan, and other sites. Ivan Zotsenko is a younger research officer of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine in the Institute of Archaeology. Colleagues, am I audible? That's all right. Welcome, dear friends, colleagues, and all the rest. As far as this event is dedicated to the inauguration of the newly created center, I would love to tell you not only about the experience of the Archaeology Institute and its functioning on this terrain, but also about the participation of Kiev Mahila Academy and our partners. I will start with it and I will end with it. I'm the representative of the Archaeological Institute. We must acknowledge that this institute is incapable of conducting methodological work on monitoring of sites. We don't have financing, we have experts, but equipping long-standing permanent expeditions, unfortunately, we don't have the resources for that. But our staff members did try to conduct such studies, and I will demonstrate a couple of cases that were immediately related to my work. I work in Kiev and Kiev region, a bit in Chernihiv and in Cherkasy region, in Dnipro Valley. I will show a couple of cases of colleagues working at the frontline territories, but I'll also demonstrate cases we did in cooperation with our partners and how I envisage the development of this organization because of which we have gathered here. Since 2014, the staff members of the university started monitoring the damaged archaeological sites. In our opinion, archaeological heritage takes the biggest acreage among all the possible sites in Ukraine, but besides those known to archaeologists, there are many that have not been found. They exist, but we don't know about them. The war and the hostilities, active defense operations incur lots of earthwork and changes in landscape. It manifests itself in artillery shellings, construction of engineering structures, humanitarian demining, involving special equipment. That's why, unfortunately, even when we don't know about a site and it is gradually destroying, we will never know about it. Then that's the information which will be impossible to recover because a new Kiev and Rus settlement will never re-emerge. Monitoring of some sites, enormous sizes of land work, is critical to preserve information in the first place. Not only to preserve physically the site, but to preserve information about this site. I will approach from the scientific point of view. In general, with the support of different organizations, our partners was the German Archaeological Institute, which allocated money and helped us with the monitoring events. Our long-standing partners are HAMO, public organization, and Archaic, an NGO that help and favor these events. UNESCO in Ukraine helped us to monitor in Kakhovka. We conducted surveys in 6 regions and have registered intrusions on 577 sites. Unfortunately, most of those intrusions were not related with the war, but they were related with looting, black archaeology, and earthworks and economic works. Still, there are some cases related to the war. I will show you a couple of ones. It's not the first event dedicated to monitoring expeditions. The information that I will be showing to you can be easily spotted on the web. Just one interesting case for me. I'm sorry, I'm mostly dealing with medieval archaeology. The biggest and the most painful case is Oster and all the Kievan Rus site. There was such a building, an apsid of a temple of the 13th century. But there was also a basement, and in course of the construction of the military infrastructure, the foundation of that building was damaged. That's the only preserved building of Pereyaslav School of Construction. No other building of that school has been preserved. They have unique wall paintings, and the northern aisle of that temple was destroyed. We will be studying that this year. But we managed not just to record those destructions, but also with the assistance of our partners, HAMO and Smithsonian Institute of the US.
Smithsonian
University of the US, we managed to preserve the remains of the temple and to stabilize the destruction, because for 3 years the temple stood on the open air, and for all the Rus sites that's very damaging. During 4 years, with the assistance of the consciousness of Bilogorodka municipality, that's an old settlement in Kiev region, Bilogorod, they've dug out lots of... Now we're doing conservation events. We have recorded such a building. That's how it looked like in a trench. We conserved it for the winter time. After that, we managed to study it. It turned out to be a 17th century unique horn to produce ceramics. They are really few. Few have been found in Kiev region. That's the information which we could have lost and never learn about it. Here I will stop. And recently, in the walls of the Kiev-Mohyla Academy, there was a training and event jointly with UNESCO dedicated to development of the shape of damage or the form of damage to archaeology site. Our long-standing partners, in addition to the NGOs, are 2 universities, one of which is where we are now, and the second one is also here with us in the room, Kiev-Mohyla Academy and Shevchenko University, 2 departments of archaeology, one of the leading ones in our country. But as far as our event is dedicated to the openings of the center in Kiev-Mohyla Academy, we will mostly speak about cooperation with this academy. A couple of years ago, we signed a memorandum, but it was foreshadowed with a series of events related to informational exchanges on popularization of archaeology. We held presentations of books and made a couple of heritage protection visits. There were a couple of cases. Thanks to, I'm grateful for the platform for the joint training with UNESCO, where we managed to bring a broad circle of experts and students to conduct a workshop and to perfectionize the shapes and forms of damages, because I doubt if at any stage those forms will be acknowledged officially in our country, but still for the community of the experts, it's always critical to exchange experience and to work in one language. And the second case, on the 18th of May, there will be an inauguration of a new archaeological center in the territory of Kiev, Mahila Monastery. It was exploded in 1939, and the construction of the governmental quarter. But in course of the construction, they found a unique structure. There are less than a dozen in the territory of Kiev and Rus. It preserved the apsid, walls, driveway, and not only foundations, but also the wall bricks. And unfortunately, more than 20 years, this building was standing in the open air. It was abandoned. There was a warehouse in it. With a group of volunteers, we addressed
заповідника Стародавній Київ і
to the old Kiev reserve and to the priests. They allowed us to clear out those foundations. Unfortunately, over the 20 years, 3 layers of bricks were removed. But thanks to the students of the Kiev Mogila Academy, we managed to clear out that space, to bring it in order, and on the 18th of May, there will be inauguration of that site. We produced a 3D model of its contemporary condition, stuffed this space with information, and that's part of the job of this center. Not only the damaged sites by the war, but also the popular, no matter how it strangely sounds, because we have big problems with archaeology in Ukraine, with understanding what it is, and such measures and such spaces attracting attention, because archaeology is mostly something under the ground, and here you can come and see with your eyes.
And basically touch the building. But going back to the destroyed sites, I will speak about the case related to war later, because another case is a stable work on the territory of Trachtomyriv Peninsula. This year we're going to have the 3rd joint expedition with KMA, and the Academy became the work on the peninsula on global intelligence, and went to Institute of Archaeology with a notice that there were certain sites that they fall into the coast of Kaniv Sea. But unfortunately, we must prioritize the place of investigation, because there are many sites and many of them are being destroyed. But then there are sites that are more significant, unfortunately. We cannot cover all. And there are the priority sites. And one of such sites is, here you can see Oleg Olegovich, who is recording the stratigraphy. This is a very famous Kiev time burial ground, because it stopped existing in Mongolian times. There, more than 100 burials has been analyzed. That's a very big sample for the medieval times burial. But unfortunately, it keeps on falling to Kiev Sea, and we are losing not just the unique material, but it's anthropological material. That's why we dedicated some time to this burial ground, and we keep on watching its condition. If it goes down, we're going to select the burials that are falling out. But unfortunately, we cannot do full work. We cannot dig out the entire site. Plus, it's not good use of it. We need to leave something to our heirs. And second case is also in the territory of Trachtomyriv Peninsula, the so-called Tserkovshchina, with a tract. And we have analyzed the two ancient cave Ras temples, but unfortunately these sites, we have no reports about this because they're kept in Moscow. And also the problem is that the unique cultural layer goes into Kaniv Sea. And this year we, in the beginning of March, went to record stratigraphy section. And the uniqueness of this monastery is that it stopped its existence in the Mongolian times. So the object of this monastery, they were not added by later on layers, but it has a very unique topography, as the cave time topography is covered with a sterile layer of some sorts of deposits or sediments. So even the black archaeologists couldn't touch it. And at the previous slide, we showed you that there are many construction materials and of murals. And we found this type of mural with the inscription, and that is some prayer. But apart from this, we are bothered by the architectural remnants. We don't understand in what condition they are or how far away they are from the coastline. And this year, our joint expedition will be doing this work on trying to attach the placement of these temples, check their condition, and see what's happening to cultural layers that are falling down into the sea. And the last case I would like to show right now, we returned from the expedition 2 weeks ago from Tashan village. It's at the southeast of Kiev region, next to Pereyaslav, on Subi River. And this is the biggest town that is located, or the biggest settlement. Unfortunately, a strange situation happened there. We had a monitoring case in 2023, and we visited the site, and there were the anti-terroristic operation fighters there, and there were more than 300 meters of the trenches. But that was obvious and clear for us in 2022. But in 2024, after the order to increase the defense capacity of Kiev, 2 excavators were issued to do the fortification, and that's what the site looked like before the intervention. So this part of the settlement was cut in 1960s when the road was placed, and the site is multi-layered, and there are also the lines of the moats, and then the palace was built here. And from this palace, there is a elevation, as you can see here. Unfortunately, usually archaeologists can't say approximately like 300 meters or 500 meters, but it's really hard for me to say what is the square total damaged on the site. We filmed it using the equipment on the support of Kyiv Mohila Academy, and using the tachometers, but maybe it's 900 meters. But this is unbelievable area. Unfortunately, we lost lots of objects. And it's a non-standard site for this settlement, since it looks like the ancient Kiev Rus town. The settlement itself is 200 meters long, and they have also Kurgan group, and there are silver pieces that were found there, and we have recorded damages in 800 places of architecture. Our expedition was rather chaotic because the local authorities, just like the local residents, they left the positions, and we cannot have a full archaeological research, but we at least recorded the place of damage, and we took maximum information about stratigraphy, and we did that. And here I would like to thank the HAMO, Kyiv Mohila Academy, for the support in the expedition, for the resources that were granted and the equipment that we were provided, and you personally joined to this research. So summing up, I should say that currently we unfortunately, in my opinion, have the following situation, and that is that we have certain number of experts who may and can work continuously monitoring the damaged sites, objects, but unfortunately you can't make them leave their job, a scientific job, and only transfer them into conservation of sites. We understand that the public sector in other states plays a bigger role in such measures, and establishing the centers based on the universities when there is not only material resource in place, but human resource, when there are people who can study fast and who can quickly master the technologies. And this is especially important when your works are not like this, that you only have to spend 2 months on the site and work there, but you have to give a recommendation. A number of methodological guidelines have been developed on conservation, research, and remote analysis. These materials are in place now, they just have to be used. And establishing a center like this is going to give this impetus to hold similar works. And they will be not only because of the ruins, conflict-related ruins, but also archaeological ones. Because during our measures, not in the front line, but in the regions inside of the state, the majority of damages, like in Kyiv, Chernihiv regions, are mostly related not to military actions or the military engineering construction, but with a non-targeted use of land, illegal construction sites. And we have a certain stagnation. I don't even know how to call this. Some outdated monitoring system in the ministry and in the regions. They lack resources, they lack human resources, and similar works can be of practical use for people. So I'm thanking everyone for listening to my chaotic speech, and I hope that this center will operate not only internally, but will also disseminate knowledge, will cooperate, as the cooperation is the only thing which, in my opinion, gives at least some practical result. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for your presentation. Indeed, when we planned today, the lectures for today, we were willing to have an overview from inside of the state on how to work with heritage. And here you also mentioned different ways to work with heritage on the field and remotely. And this is indeed interesting, just how differently this may look. I think we will have time to discuss this. And right now, I would like to give floor, if I can please switch Zoom back on. So I would like to give floor to our third speaker, Mr. Stephen Kelly, who is the architect and an engineer who works with the sites all over the world, from Ukraine until Mongolia. And Stephen is going to share with us his experience of work in Ukraine with Ukrainian sites. Mr. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Can you see my screen and hear me okay?
Yeah, we see and hear you perfect.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. It is an honor for me to speak to you today, and I want to thank the organizers for this important event. I wish I could be there in person and under better circumstances. I've been in Kiev on numerous occasions and envision Kiev with the chestnuts in bloom. As a brief introduction, I am an architect and engineer with a long career in built heritage conservation. More specifically, I first visited Ukraine in 1999 as an ECOMOS consultant to peer review the reconstruction of the Uspensky Sobor, and I took these photographs from the bell tower. I was present during its dedication on Independence Day in 2000. This led to consultations between 2000 and 2002 on the planning for restoration of the Cerkva Spasana Berestove that is also part of the Kiev-Pečersk Lavra. In 2003 and 2004, I prepared a conservation management plan on 34 Slovak and Polish Lemko-style Greek Catholic churches on the western side of the Carpathians, which brings us to this project. At the invitation of ICOMOS, I took part in a project in October 2024 to review the Church of St. George in the village of Drohobych and the Church of the Descent of the Holy Spirit in the village of Potelich in Lviv Oblast. These churches are included in the 16 wooden cerkvas of the Carpathian region in Poland and Ukraine UNESCO World Heritage Site. The work was performed in collaboration with UNESCO, and you can see a list of everybody that was involved in that project, but I do want to call out to Zeynep Gul Unal, who is our team leader and risk preparedness expert, Mario Santana Quintero and Miguel Reina Ortiz, who were our documentation experts, myself as the structural engineer expert, Darina Nedzelska and Sergei Ravenko with UNESCO Kiev, and Darina is online with us this afternoon, and Professor Dr. Mykola Bevs from Lviv Polytechnic University. Our work, built on the work of past and ongoing investigations, had three components: documentation, condition survey, and risk preparedness planning. I will speak on the condition survey at length. The investigative techniques utilized range from simple to sophisticated and include review of archival data, geometric survey, and physical non-invasive survey. Before we go any further, I would like to introduce you to the other hardworking team members. This is Zeynep Gulonal in the blue vest, along with Darina, meeting with the fire chief in Drohobych, discussing risk preparedness. And this is drone operator Mario Santana holding his drone, laser scanner Miguel Reina, and Sergei Ravenko documenting the wall paintings at the Church of St. George. We were also pleased to assist Mykola Bevs in the removal of wood samples at the Potelich Church for species identification in the laboratory at Lviv Polytechnic University. Factors that define the outstanding universal value of the churches include highly skilled carpentry, innovative structural solutions, three-part ground plan composed of simple rectangles and octagons, and original and unique cupola designs. Let's see if we can move this down here. Maybe this is better. The two wood churches that we will focus on are the Church of the Descent of the Holy Spirit and the Church of St. George. The early Galician type churches consist of a square-based pyramidal structure composed of horizontally laid logs reinforced with vertical wood pegs. The Church of the Descent of the Holy Spirit in Potelich, shown above, is one of the oldest examples of the early Galician church. In later Galician churches, the cupola took on a more developed form, becoming almost spherical. This phenomenon is exemplified by the Church of St. George in Drohobych, where references to Western stylistic trends begin to appear from Renaissance and Baroque art. Let's start by talking about the church in Potelich. The Church of the Descent of the Holy Spirit is an active Greek Catholic parish built in 1502 and is one of the oldest wooden churches to survive in the region. It is the best preserved example of a church in its archaic form, representing one of the first phases of the evolution of wooden church architecture, before hipped roofs were replaced with cupolas. The polychrome decoration of the interior dates from 1628 and from the early 18th century. The iconostasis shown in the upper right, that's here, dates from the 17th century as well. The cupola above the sanctuary shown on the left was constructed in 1736. At some point, the iconostasis was moved westward. To accomplish this, the sanctuary was partly dismantled and reconstructed in a more westerly location. It is assumed that this work occurred both before or during the cupola construction above the sanctuary. 4 wood columns shown on the right were installed during the Soviet period within the nave with interconnecting beams that support the pyramidal roof. Vertical stabilizing braces shown on the left were installed on the north and south walls of the nave during the Soviet period, and you can see those here and here. They are installed on the interior and exterior sides of the wall and are interconnected with metal through bolts shown here. The 4 wood columns and the vertical braces mark the fragile nature of this church structure. The original foundations were believed to be vertical wooden poles placed on the ground at the corners of each tripart and is shown on the upper right photo from another wood church in Drohobych. The present foundation is a continuous stone foundation laid in mortar that is continuous around the exterior of the building. The bottom legs are oak and are contemporary. The building above is composed of rectangular hewn pine logs with corner interlocks with what appear to be simple lock overlaps as shown in the diagram. A large skirt protects the wood walls below from direct rainfall. The exterior walls, roofs, and cupolas above the level of the skirt are covered with wood shakes. Numerous deformations were observed. The lantern atop the cupola of the sanctuary has a pronounced westward lean. You can see that. You can see that here. We were able to do this quick qualitative study using the 3D laser scan implemented by others prior to our arrival. Wood decay from longhorn beetle infestation is extensive and is most likely the greatest threat to the church. The decay was more prevalent on the north side of the nave. The flight holes from the beetles were larger in diameter and more extensive on the exterior than the interior, indicating that there is more than one type of beetle, perhaps several types, that have caused damage. The Carpathian Mountains are a biodiversity hotspot, hosting a rich diversity of longhorn beetles, with some studies indicating over 100 species in specific subregions. These insects are a crucial part of the region's forest ecosystems. Unfortunately, the rich collection of wooden churches through Ukraine fall within the realm of their primary food source. The recent probe analysis led by a local team revealed the condition of the north wall of the nave is very poor and has lost structural integrity, leaving, in some cases, only 2 centimeters of unspoiled wood left between the exterior and the interior. And this is the exterior survey, and this is a survey from the interior. The colors show the different levels of deterioration, or I should say depths of deterioration. The image of the wall paintings on the north wall of the nave with added vertical braces reveals the precious heritage that is in danger of being lost and poses a significant preservation challenge in the future. We took hundreds of moisture content readings on the exterior and interior on all elevations and at different heights of the wall. The moisture content was found to be excessive in numerous places and may promote fungal growth. The moisture content was much lower on the interior than on the exterior. Now let's turn our attention to the second church. The Church of St. George was a parish church built around the second half of the 17th century and is presently a branch of the Drohobych Folklore Museum. The church represents the pinnacle of wooden cupola construction technology. Of particular interest is the application of an extensive range of carpentry techniques. It features a polygonal kleros on either side of the nave, and the kleros are shown here and here. With small Baroque cupolas over each. A second floor chapel above the narthex with a choir loft overlooking the nave. Three Baroque domes and a wide skirt of roof encircling the sanctuary. The present foundation is mortared sandstone that is continuous around the exterior of the building. The building above the foundation is composed of rectangular hewn logs with corner interlocks with what appears to be a version of heel and buzzard overlaps, as shown in the diagram. The bottom logs are oak, while the remainder are pine. The exterior walls and towers above the level of the skirt and porch are covered with wood shakes, some of which have been recently installed. The walls and ceiling of the nave, upper chapel, and parts of the narthex are covered with iconographic paintings. The iconostasis had been removed during our visit and was being restored in Kiev. According to the records, a previous church built in 1499 was destroyed by fire in 1657. In 1678, the present church was completed, as evidenced by the inscription on the cross vault of the nave. In 1692, the construction of the narthex began with the second-story chapel above it. Stone foundations were installed in 1822, replacing the wood posts. There have been restorations and improvements through the 19th and 20th centuries. Since its inclusion on the World Heritage List in 2013, surveys have been carried out. It has been laser scanned. Test pits were dug to investigate the foundations, and wood samples were removed for microbiological and species identification. Again, we observed numerous global deformations. As an example, the cupola of the sanctuary shown on the right has a pronounced westward lean. There are other areas of more localized deformation that were observed, including a pulling away of the north kleros from the nave, bowing of the wall between the nave and sanctuary, and separation of the logs in the dome of the sanctuary. And it is believed that a lot of these deformations were locked in place after the continuous stone foundations were put in the 19th century. The dome separation was believed to have been caused by a nearby rocket explosion that occurred in 2023. We inspected this area closely and reviewed the laser scans, but could not offer a definitive opinion on the cause, as there was no previous record of its profile available. And of course, this shows the importance of the precise laser scans that were being performed during our site visit, which will help to it sets a good benchmark for the future. The dome separation was beetle infestation, though not as advanced in the Patelish Church, is extensive on the exterior and is the greatest threat to the church. One view of the insect-induced wood decay on the exterior, shown here, reveals how the extent of the decay may be hidden from visual detection. Beetle attack is localized, more prevalent on the exterior, and will vary from log to log and from location on each log. We were able to also observe the extensive wood decay on the logs above the narthex and upper chapel, where the shingles had been removed and were not yet replaced. Insects prefer to dwell in the protected spaces between the shingles and the logs. The moisture content of the logs on the exterior of the church was found to be within an acceptable range. Atmospheric dew point analysis revealed that the dew point on the outside of the building was about 14 degrees centigrade, but 11 degrees centigrade on the inside. It is hypothesized that the interior wood absorbs moisture from the air, and the log structure acts as a humidity regulator. So in conclusion, the greatest natural threats to the wood churches besides fire are insect and fungal induced decay, excessive moisture content in the wood, human action, uncontrolled tourism, and acts of war. The wood churches are composed of organic materials that are subject to the exterior environment. The log assemblies breathe, as evidenced by the change in dew point from inside to outside. Wood building materials will not last as long as stone or brick. Dead wood, wood-eating insects, and fungal formations have struck an ecological balance in timeless relationship. One is food and the other two are the consumers. Wood goes through dimensional changes due to moisture, temperature, and loss of integrity, and deformations like these ones observed are not unusual, though they need to be continuously monitored. The existing deformations from foundation settling were locked in place when the new foundations were installed. These locked-in deformations make it difficult to diagnose movements. It must be said that the stone foundations have been an extremely favorable intervention and have seemingly arrested further foundation settlement. The recent laser scanning can be used as a benchmark to monitor future movements. Cyclical maintenance, water management, and long-term monitoring will address most of the issues raised. However, addressing insect infestations will continue to be an evolving strategy. These are the present strategies. Chemical. In Ukraine, the following methods are mainly used for fungal and pest control: antiseptics and fumigation. Antiseptics should be applied as coarse sprays or with a paintbrush. Fumigation should entail enclosing the entire structure in an envelope to create a fumigation chamber. The use of heat is an effective method in controlling populations of wood-boring beetles. The temperature of the wood must be maintained at 50 degrees centigrade for at least 30 minutes to kill all active stages of the insect development. Finally, microwave insecticide shows great promise, but is costly and can only be used as a local treatment. All methods must be encompassing on an existing building to be effective, and the method must be repeated if there is a reinfestation. I want to thank the interpreters for helping me communicate with the audience. Дякую і слава Україні.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for paying additional attention to laser scanning, as in Ukraine, on archaeological sites where we work, it's usually used more for just saving the site itself in some 3D world or etc. But we are not using that much laser scans and photogrammetry for monitoring how the site changes. And I guess that it's really important for us as archaeologists also to start doing it, because it can help to understand the site better and how it's changing because of the war. Thank you so much. I guess now we have 15 minutes for some questions from me and from the audience. I have the very first question to Adam Smith. Можете, будь ласка, весь Zoom? Дякую. You work with satellite monitoring, but how are you checking the information on the land? If you are checking, do you have some local partners? Because the information should be really checked to understand if it's true or not. Satellite imagery gives us a lot, but to combine it with what is going on site.
So Karabakh is still a closed area. It's primarily military and development that's going on there. It's not visitable by the descendant community of Armenians whose cultural heritage we're particularly attentive to. So we don't have on the ground potential partners. UNESCO doesn't go. There are not heritage professionals that are engaged in the region who can do on-site visits. That's why we have to do the satellite monitoring in the first place. So our process involves our team, first of all, making assessments. We do work closely with heritage professionals in Yerevan who have deep knowledge of the structures that we're looking at. We have made outreach to look for Azerbaijani colleagues who are engaged in cultural heritage protection as well. It's politically extremely difficult at the current moment for them to work with us, but we hope that those conditions change in the future and that we can work collaboratively on the common cause of cultural heritage preservation in the future.
And do you use some information from the open sources to check your satellite data? As in Ukraine, we also have a lot of occupied territories where we can't work on site, and different organizations are using satellite imagery, but they're also checking some social media or some TV programs of the occupied television and etc. Are you using this data?
Yes, we do. We have open source intelligence that we utilize. It's in the early days, right after the Second War, and to a certain extent, right after the 2023 expulsion of the Armenians. There was a flurry of social media, largely coming from Azerbaijani soldiers. But that got cracked down on very quickly. And the trickle of social media information is actually very limited at the moment. We do get official pronouncements every now and then. So just a couple of weeks ago, we documented the destruction of two large churches in the capital of Kankendi or Stepanakert. And the Azerbaijani state organizations came out and said, yes, we did destroy these monuments. So we do get confirmation sometimes from official Azerbaijani government channels. But social media has gotten much more controlled out of the area, and it's much more difficult to get open source intelligence that from places like X or Facebook than it used to be.
Thank you. Stephen, you have some comment?
Well, I just wanted to comment that there's a lot of information on social media presently about things that are being Armenian heritage is being lost in the in these territories that Adam Smith talked about. I have been working on the Ani archaeological site, which is an Armenian city ruin in Turkey on the border of Armenia. And in the 1960s, and we've visited many of our former Armenian sites. It's in a free book publication from the World Monuments Fund called Ani in Context. A lot of these sites were the Turkish government was trying to eradicate them in the 1960s. It was a incomplete eradication, and now we're starting to value those sites, and they're being opened as tourist sites. So the places where locals have been going and trying to find Armenian gold at these sites, they're finding the Armenian gold as actual tourism. So I hope that that's a positive spin on this very sad story that Professor Smith was presenting to us. Thank you.
And with continuing this question, I want to address it to Stephen and to Ivan about how important is in working in conflict zones, in totally in the countries which are in conflict, to work with hromadas and with local people. And I guess Adam can also answer this question, but as you are doing satellite, maybe it's more connected to people working on site. As this people on site who live there, they can bring some more information. And can you share your experience with working, maybe Ivan can share the experience with working with local communities on the sites which are damaged, and Stephen can share maybe about how local communities help to preserve this heritage, or how they treat the heritage they have, and how do you work with these local people. Maybe we can start from Stephen and then move to Ivan.
Sure. Well, UNESCO and ICOMOS, they arranged for us to work with the locals, and of course we had Darina and Sergey with us from UNESCO Kiev. Everybody was delighted that we were there, and they were present during our entire time, and they were very helpful. And it was very easy to work with everybody, and actually it was a pleasure. And the important thing, Lviv Oblast is in extreme western Ukraine. They are not suffering from as much conflict as what's happening in eastern Ukraine, although it does happen because the Russians want to show that they have that they can reach to every corner of Ukraine. But we didn't really have that problem. But the churches that we were looking at, they are, wood is fairly robust, but they're very old and they're very fragile. And a rocket blast, a bomb blast, even if it's a kilometer away, it sends a shock wave much like an earthquake, and it can cause some damage. All that can be done, besides setting up some type of protective barriers, is to continue with the maintenance. And the maintenance was continuing, at least at the church in Drohobych, because they were actively replacing the shingles on the outside of the building. And of course, when they took the shingles down, they were finding all this damage, and they were doing a replacement. Some of the work that they were doing is long term. Some of it is really good, like the foundations. but the Soviet era framework that was put up in the church in Potelich, that can only be considered to be a temporary measure, because that doesn't really address the problem. You have to address the cause of the problem and not just the effect.
Thanks. Іван, нас як науковців не так багато.
Ivan, us as scientists, we're not that many to preserve all of the sites, so it's important to cooperate with the community, because these are the people who are there and they can notify quickly if something is happening to the site, if it was destroyed because of hostilities or because of the fortification construction, which are also due to military action. So how does this work with communities takes place, and how active is it? Well, first of all, our monitoring experience, have shown that we do need to work with the territorial communities, because they are the administrative unit and they are related to the local authorities. These are people from the Department of Culture or some local activists, but they live on the territorial community and they are known in the community by the local authorities, and some of them are very much related to the system, and no one knows better who's on the territory of community than its local authorities, or where the military are, or which infrastructure they are connected to. And this is the information that you can request from general staff and obtain it 3 months later, and may not be relevant once you get it. That's why the communities is basically the actor that is the most efficient one to go to for information. Second one, on the legislative level, the communities bear a number of duties to monitor, to take care of the sites on their territory. And the experience is diverse, unfortunately, in Ukraine. I would divide it into two halves. So one of the frontline areas, because they are in special conditions. Quite often the experts are hard to be found there, as is Karabakh, like no locals who could go and take a look at it with their eyes. But we have very brave people. And it was very showcasing for me when the director of the museum from Izum, who still is there and who's going through all these shellings and takes care of the sites, takes care of the collections to be moved, but frontline areas, that's a separate dialogue. There are certain relevant satellite images we can get, but there are restrictions due to security, mining, demining, a lot worse situation with drones, with optic fiber, and in fact with the hostilities themselves, because in the frontline area, apart from the remote monitoring, the communities are the only source of information sometimes. And if we go into in-depth of the state, unfortunately, we have different cases when the community says, when archaeology is not our problem. We don't care that you have, excavated something or not. We need to lay down the asphalt. And then, for example, Bilohorodska and Shalska communities with whom we worked, who want to conserve the damaged sites, who allocate funds to do so, understanding the importance of these sites. And unfortunately, the situation, is different. But after you send the request and learn about the demining or the safety situation, or get access to data, Hromada is the second stakeholder, who's both the user and like an interested party for this heritage not to be destroyed, because this is their future, their resources of this community. And this is the second stakeholder you have to go to. Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the audience? If no, I have one more question for everyone. Brief remarks from all, and then we'll wrap up. So we are talking about the sites which were damaged because of military actions, this way or another. And a lot was said that we had to conserve these sites, to preserve these sites. But do you think that military actions, the new iteration in the life of the site. I mean, I understand that it's damage, and that's clear. But let's think about it without such bright emotions. I know it's destruction, but we are also to tell this story of the site, right? What do you think? Should we tell this story of the site? I'm not saying that we should leave it with the trenches around it or open, but what about the continuity of the life of the site? It lives and acts in time and space. Do you think we need to tell about the destruction as well, or should we conserve everything, close, hide or cover up or erase this day of the history of its destruction? Thank you. Well, there are certain nuances to this question. We may approach as scientists to it or as preservers of the sites, because as scientists, of course, we lose information, we lose archaeological context. We can get some things from it, but we understand that this could go to some black market. It's going to be just the context of the some sort of discoveries, and that's all. But it's not going to be related to the cultural scars. And from the scientific point of view, it's a big tragedy because we don't understand which objects are being lost, even though there are other aspects about the landscape and the use of topographic conditions to do hostilities. But as for the preservation of the heritage, it's a nightmare because it's important to at least keep track of it, at least in the geographical coordinates, to keep track of these destructions, so there are archaeologists of the next generation who comes on the site. Because if you now just cover it up and don't identify it, because many people who used to work in the old age, ancient Kiev Rus settlements, they could find the trenches of the Second World War. And I often faced the following situation when, during archaeological excavations, I could find something that was covered up from the times of the Second World War. And I think it's a big tragedy from the point of view of the memory. I did not mean that it's a destruction or not destruction. I mean, do we erase this history, this part of the history of the heritage? So do we only speak about ancient cave rust times of its existence, or do we also speak about what happened to it afterwards? Well, of course, it's part of the history of the site. And if the site, again, participates, so to say, in the hostilities, so we have to continue this story in this chronicle. In 10 years from now, we can understand the consequences of the actions that take place right now. We can assess them more objectively, but not subjectively as we do it now. Pavlo Sergeyevich, forgive me, we want to ask also our speakers.
I can provide just a little bit of context from the South Caucasus. In our case, many of the medieval monuments that we examine and we monitor have experienced waves of invasion and conflict over the centuries. So conflict itself is not an unusual phenomenon for these monuments. What's unusual in the 21st century is cultural erasure, the capacity to not just damage sites, but to completely eradicate them, such that even an archaeologist like me would be unable to document their presence in a future moment. Right? That's what we're seeing in Nakhchivan in particular, was the total expunging of sites from the landscape and the effort to effectively write out an entire community from the history of that place. It's one thing to attend to the history with its scars and its marks and its battles. That's one thing. It's another thing to pretend it never even existed. And I think that that's a particularly dangerous form because we already know how the erasure of a people from history is either prologue or predicate to the erasure of a people. And it's one thing we think we need to keep a very close eye on.
Stephen?
Okay. Yes. I'm going to limit my my comments to the wood churches that I was working on. That is, I think that there's a lot to be learned from the Japanese taking care of this type of heritage, which goes for maintenance, restoration, reconstruction. The Japanese came up with the Nara document. I believe it was in 1994, and basically they defined their heritage not only with the materiality of brick, stone, wood, but in the craft used to develop this heritage. And of course, they have very old wood structures. They're very old because they often take them apart and put them back together again using the same fine craft techniques that they have. Ukraine needs to preserve and teach these types of woodcraft techniques so they can continue to care for these churches in the future. I also wanted to quickly mention, because this was brought up about laser scanning, 35 years ago, I used to climb up on ladders and drop a plumb bob down the side of columns to measure how much it was out of plumb. And now we have laser scanning, and instead of a person like me with a plumb bob collecting 12 or 13 points, we're collecting 1,000,000 points. But the people who are doing the laser scanning, they fall in love with the models that they're building and with the picture, but we're collecting a lot of really good, valid information. And what we should be doing is we should be learning how to use that valid information to be better better equipped to do building diagnostics. Thank you very much.
We have a comment from the...
Я б хотів би наголосити з
I
приводу
would like to emphasize on the idea just how much the trenches and the military objects are the development of the landscape history as well, right? Did I understand it correctly, Olexandra? This is like a continuation of the history, and we may recall the Japanese kintsugi principle when the restoration of ceramics envisages underlying certain cracks and filling up the cracks with the material that permits to show the cracks, to demonstrate the cracks. And the same principle could be applicable during the restoration of the architectural monuments that were not only affected by the war or just were affected because of earthquakes or some other natural disasters. When the emphasis is made on certain elements of destruction, the traces from bullets, bombardment, and like leaving it as elements of memorialization of historic events, let's say military events in this case. As for landscape and archaeology, in the ecological sense, it is a loss. Yes, it's destruction of archaeological monument. But on the other hand, we understand because in fact, Ivan, you told us when we were traveling around Kiev region, you said, look, these Kiev-Rus towns, they were the defense system in the current war. Wait, what does that mean? It means that these are scars, yes, but these scars may be represented as memorialization of the historic events. That's first point. Second point, you yourself said that in 10 years, these trenches will turn into historic source. Because there are books about defending Kyiv in the times of the Second World War. Then there are people who do the mapping of trenches of the Second World War. And all of this also transforms into history. And sometime later, this will also turn into archaeological sources. So in my opinion, I cannot say that we have to completely have positive attitude to such phenomena. No, of course not. We have to objectively treat them because these are also elements of the landscape development and we can go anywhere without it. I would also like to comment, Pavlo Sergeyevich. Yes, indeed, I did say that Olexandra and I have published the article about the such landscapes of Kiev and how the modern settlements were used from the moment of Kiev appeared, and that there was a system of fortresses and so on. Yes, for the defense of a certain core. And the historic reference, that's something interesting in theory, but from practical point of view, we have two specialists for Kiev region and hundreds of kilometers of trenches. We cannot take information from there. Basically, this information just will disappear. And yes, they do establish memorial complexes now. I know that Igor has been present at the opening of the complex in Moshchin, the memorial complex, where there were very hectic fights for Kiev. Moshchun is one of the villages in Irpin region where the Russians tried to force it on Irpin to approach Kiev. And because of that battle, they also built up some military fortification structures, and they were turned into memorial complexes today. They were conserved and turned into museums. But we cannot allow ourselves to turn each place like this that was destroyed during the war to turn into memorial complexes. Not each of them will become that. And if we count it in percentages, in theory, that's interesting. But in practical dimension, we have 90% of poor experience and 10% of good experience. So who are we to judge? Yes, but my opinion, this is a big problem for us. If we had the capacity to cover it all, that's another story. But any country, as I think today, isn't capable to manage this volume, this scale of destruction. The system was not meant for such scale of damage. And please remember that our country has the longest front line currently. And we are the biggest EU country, yes, and these are gigantic territories that are being affected. Thank you for participation in this discussion. I think we can continue it because I also have something to say to Ivan, but we are to wrap up. And therefore, thank you so much to Ivan, to Mr. Adam, to Mr. Steven for your beautiful presentations. And indeed, we have already communicated and said that us as archaeologists, we did obtain a lot of information listening to architects for these 2 days, because so much attention for details we may sometimes omit when being in the architectural buildings is impressive. So thank you for that. It was very interesting to hear about the experience with Nahir Karabakh. And I think that we will study more thoroughly the activity of the center that does the monitoring of the monuments there. So thank you so much to all the speakers, and we will switch to the final stage of the today. And I think we can try to make it shorter, but we'll see as it goes.